Hello, my name is Adeline and this is my worst books of 2019. This video is a little late, but there was a lot of stuff happening before, and so now I'm back in college and I don't have all the books with me, but since it's the worst books, I feel like if we don't show them, we're not really at a loss. So these are just my opinions. If you enjoy these books, there's nothing really necessarily wrong with you. This is just what I think. Everything on this channel and why I make these videos is to share what I think. Yeah, so let's get started. So the first two books I have are my honorable mentions, are dishonorable mentions, my dishonorable mentions. And so these ones, the books weren't necessarily bad, like they didn't really deserve a spot, but I need to include them because there was something about them that would just piss me off. The first one is Pride by Ibi Zavoy. I hated the main character, and it kept going through this whole thing of not being black enough, which is one of my least favorite terms and my least favorite things that happens. Is like, who are you to say that this guy isn't black enough? Who are you to like negate him, his identity? Like, what are you doing? And she was so like hypocritical, and she was so contradictory to herself, because it was like, okay, you're choosing this guy who throughout the book, I can't remember the characters' names, but I loved Pride and Prejudice, so I remember those characters' names. But the guy who's supposed to be the Collins, he's such, pardon my language, but he's such an asshole, and I hated that. And I was like, how can she not see it? Because she's set up to be so smart, but she's not, because she's with this asshole just because she's deemed that he's black enough, which was so messed up. And then also they go to DC at one point, and I know that area very well. So she's at Howard University for a tour, and then she goes to Busboys and Poets, and then she goes to Ben's Chili Bowl. And the way that she had the like layout of DC was so wrong, and as someone who lives in DC, it was so frustrating. And my sister had gone to school in that area. When I told her about this, she was like, that doesn't make any sense. And then they talked about getting a taxi from outside of Ben's Chili Bowl and how they just parked right there. And I was like, where do you live where you can just park right in front of there? Like, you can't. And where are you getting a taxi from? They don't have taxis like running regularly in DC. You'd have to call it and wait for a while. Like, you'd most likely use Uber. And this book was written in a time when Uber existed. So, and then the references, I don't have the book, but I marked every time that there was a weird reference. But the reason why it's a mention and not actually placing in my rank, even though it's clearly got me heated, is that the writing was really good. The second dishonorable mention is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica Sanchez. I'm already getting fired up because I know what's coming. Spoiler alert and kind of trigger warning, but this book used rape as a plot device to make the mother seem more understandable, and like the main character was supposed to understand the mother so much better because she found out that she had been raped. And I hated that it was used in that way as kind of like this plot device or this reason for why her and her mother don't get along, or why her mother acts the way that she does. I just hated the way that it was done because it was so thoughtless, and it was such a heavy topic that I wished it had been handled better. And the family never talks about this. She knows so much. She figures out so much about her family, or at least we're told that she figures out so much about her family, and yet I felt like she didn't really have a deep heart-to-heart with her mom, and her mom came around so much quicker than I would have expected, because in real life it takes years to understand where someone else is coming through when you have such deep just your depths of your soul are so vastly different and what you believe is different. It just was too quick. And the whole book, it's supposed to take place over 2 years, which I didn't realize until I got to the end, because it felt like 2 months. The pacing was so off, like the timing was so weird. It just felt like everything was moving way too quickly, but not in a way where you knew that time was still moving. It just felt like everything was very close together, and I didn't really understand the pace. And then also the summary was very misleading, which I'm not going to fault the book for that. It was very, very disappointing. And the sister aspect felt like it should have been like a primary plot detail, but it felt like a secondary one. So number 10 is The Vanishing Stare by Maureen Johnson. I read Truly Devious, and it was so predictable to me. Like it was just very predictable, but I generally liked the main character and a lot of the other like side characters, so I figured, and also like I kind of wanted to see what would happen because I had invested so much time in this first book. So I got this is the second book, and it was so much worse. But also, it was worse, but I also am so close to finishing it that like I want to keep going. But it was so predictable for me. I hate the love interest. He's awful, just an awful person. And the conflict between him and the main character, it was supposed to be intense, but it wasn't at all. I didn't feel the stakes. Their main conflict, I didn't feel like it was that serious, and he kept doing all these things that I was like, she needs to just drop him altogether, because it's clear that he's not stable. But she didn't, and I'm like, why do you care so much about this? Like, what is it? Like, because I'm not seeing it. We're not seeing it. The part that I thought was going to be interesting that we got in the first book, I thought it was going to be continued on, and I was like, this is kind of intriguing. These, former students, whatever. It was just a very cliche kind of ending for the kidnapping story. I just felt like, I was like, oh, yeah, that happens. It didn't feel like anything new or special or interesting. Okay, so number 9 is one that I was so disappointed by it, but it's Waiting for Tom Hanks by Carrie Winfrey. The reason why it's at number 9, even though I was very disappointed in it, is because I liked the side characters, and I found out that the side characters are getting their own book, so now I'm really excited for that. So there's that. But other than that, the main character, she was just really annoying, and everything she did, like everything that happened between her and the love interest, it didn't feel authentic to me. And there was a big romantic gesture at the end that she had to do, and that also, I was like, it was all pointless, like, and I didn't really feel, it just didn't feel real to me. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about that one. It was just overall just very disappointing. Number 8, I put this one, it's Snowin Love by a bunch of different authors. I have in my notes that it's just Melissa De La Cruz et al. So this book was very forgettable, and I was expecting it to give me the warm, fluffy, sweet vibes, but it didn't deliver on that. And I liked one of the stories, but again, I can't tell you which one. It was a collection of short stories. They were all just not that great. This next one was also a disappointing one. It's number 7. It's The Bookish Life of Nina Hill by Abby Waxman. I was expecting to really relate to Nina, but in the end, I didn't really like her. Like, I can't remember most of the plot, so it was just a little forgettable. And I do remember that I was so upset because her and her mom never had any resolution, which I get that sometimes in life you don't have a resolution with that, but I feel like there should have been something between her and her mother, and it just wasn't there. And I love reading about mother and daughter relationships, especially like really complicated or kind of rocky relationships, and we didn't get to read about that as much. Number 6 is Comics Will Break Your Heart by Faith Erin Hicks. Again, I love comic books. I love the comic world. This book just didn't do it for me. All of the stuff about comics and about the people, the comic book fans and Comic-Con was very pretentious, and which I didn't like at all. Like it was just so pretentious and like, oh, well, these people aren't real comic book fans, because the real fans have been coming to this for like ages, and back when it was the real fan, and it was just very pretentious. And I was like, you shouldn't hate on people just because, I don't know, you shouldn't hate on people for what they like, or hate on people because they're getting into comic books. Like, I just didn't like that. And the main characters were really boring. I couldn't really, even as I was reading the book, I couldn't tell you any of their attributes or anything about their personalities. Also, the main conflict in it is this kind of Romeo and Juliet type thing, but it's not actually a conflict because the families don't actually seem to hate each other. It was boring. It was uneventful. It was just, yeah. This next one I don't really have that much to say about, but it's No Time to Spare by Ursula K. Le Guin. I read this for a book club, but I felt like the demographic of this book isn't me, so maybe that's part of the reason why I didn't really enjoy it as much. But I also felt like it was a series of blog posts, so the posts were all disjointed, and they tried to put them in some sort of order, but it never made sense. And it was also, for me, all the things that she was talking about, all these topics were so just not something I could relate to, and it wasn't, she was speaking to a very specific audience, and I just was not that audience. So number 4 is maybe an unpopular one, but it's Isla and the Happily Ever After by Stephanie Perkins. I haven't read the other 2 books in this trilogy. I have no interest in reading the first one, but I might read the second one. I picked this up from the library because it was the only one available, and right off the bat I didn't enjoy it because the main character gets together with her longtime crush, and that is one of the things I absolutely hate in books and will make me yeah, it will just make me not like the love story. Is I hate the idea of like, you've had this crush on him forever and now you're finding out that he likes you back, and wow. And I'm just like, okay, I can only suspend my disbelief so far. I feel like you've built this person up in your head. There's so much more than they actually are because you've already built them up. And so it's almost like they hold some sort of power over you. And I don't like that. I don't like that. So I feel like that's another reason why I didn't like this book. I also felt like it was really boring. And this kind of style of young adult books I'm not really into. Also I didn't care about the characters. And when you don't care about the characters, you don't care about their love story. And when your whole book is a love story, you just don't care about the book. Number 3 was another one that was so disappointing because I wanted to like this book so much because it sounded so interesting. But it was Natalie Tan's book of Love and Fortune by Roselle Lim. My main complaint right off the bat was that she immediately, any conflict that she had with her mother, she immediately gets over it once she's heard that her mother dies. And I'm like, that's not how life works. You gotta work through that. But she doesn't work through it. She just says, oh, well, she's dead now, can't hold a grudge. No, you needed to, I need to see some sort of something, like something about you trying to cope with the fight you had with your mother and that's unresolved. Like, I need something because it's unresolved for me. I also felt like there was Insta Love, and I was always, people would always say that they hate Insta Love, and I never felt like I'd read Insta Love until this moment, because the main character and her love interest act like their relationship has been so deep, so connected, so it felt like they were acting as though it was a long-term relationship, and the conflict that they had felt like like the severity of it felt like for a long-term relationship, but they'd only hung out, like he'd come into her restaurant like maybe 3 times and they'd gone on one date. And it was like, this is my soulmate, this is my everything, where, you know, this is the love. Like, what? You just met this person. Like, it's not that serious. You don't have to be, your conflicts shouldn't hold that much weight yet, you know? And then more on the conflicts. Her conflicts with the rest of the characters were also so pointless. My last thing about this book was that it was so repetitive. Like, the main character said the same lines over and over and over again, and I just couldn't take it. So now we're at our top 2, the worst of the worst. So number 2 is Love is Both Wave and Particle by Paul Cody. It's not, love is basically non-existent. They try and tell you that there's a love story, but there's none. Format of it made absolutely no sense. This book put me in such a bad reading slump. It took me forever to get through this book, and it was so short, but it took me forever. The characters, I couldn't keep them straight. It was just all these random characters being brought in, and I didn't understand what the plot was at all. I didn't follow. So this is my number 1, my worst book of 2019 is 99% Mine by Sally Thorne, which is so and why it's one of the reasons why it's the worst book is because The Hayden Game by Sally Thorne is on my best books list. So it was so I know that she can write a good book. And so when I started reading this one, I couldn't believe how bad the writing was. Like, I could not believe it. Like, I kept being like, okay, is this really happening? Like, how did she forget how to write? The characters were worse. Like, you didn't really like any of the characters, and not in a way where they were made to be unlikable. You were supposed to root for these characters, but you didn't. Yeah, but anyway, so the writing was so bad that it was confusing at times. Like, I had to reread, like, when I had never understood when people say, you know, like when you have to grade someone else's writing or edit someone else's writing in school, in like high school and middle school, they did this where there was like a scale, and at the bottom of the scale was like, the grammar is so bad you can barely read it. And I didn't really understand what that meant at the time because I'd never read something that bad, but then I read this book and I was like, now I get it, because I have to keep rereading the same sentences because they make no sense. Yeah, there was, not only did it make no sense, the characters and their motivations also made no sense. The brother, who I thought was supposed to be an asshole, he's not, he doesn't, I don't know. Am I supposed to think he's an asshole? I don't know. I put in my notes just whack ending. So, yeah, that's apparently the only word I could use to describe it. So those are all of my worst books of 2019. Yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching if you watched it. And I'll see you next time for hopefully a video with books that I liked more than these.